Right. Hi, everyone. And we're back with episode 6. Our guest today is Stefan, who is a principal software engineer. Hi, Stefan. Hi, Andrei.
Hey.
Hey.
Hi. And Stefan, could we just start off with just please tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, sure. So I've been in the software industry ever since coming straight out of university, from about 13, 14, maybe 15 years ago. It's too long. Can't ever really remember. But ultimately worked in a variety of different companies, different backgrounds from fintech, financial bank systems, government, educational, and human resource stuff. Working on technologies ranging from a lot of back end, different types of tech to front end, mobile, cloud, age old serverless stuff, and super ancient server stuff. So, yeah, been around for a little while. Got the wrinkles to prove it somewhere.
Fair enough. And do you mind if I ask, how did you get into IT? Did you always know that this is the career you wanted to pursue, or did you have, I guess, did you ever change industries or change careers?
For me, it was always a relatively straightforward one. I think I got my first games console when I was about 3 or 4, probably 4. And then at that point, I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to be in computers ever since I was super young. So anything throughout my whole life has been geared towards, right, computers. How can I kind of get into that sort of area? Um, did a questionnaire at school, and I think the thing I hated the most was agriculture. Like farming was like the absolute opposite. So anyway, was always into computers. Originally game development, and then um, when I got a little bit further on in my education, it was kind of a situation with game development where I started getting into it, and then I was like, actually, yeah, don't really fancy this for a variety of different reasons. One of them is I don't enjoy multiplying matrices and doing really heavy duty mathematician stuff as a starter for 10. Um, and the other one is kind of one of those things where it's been always a hobby of mine, and it's the how much do you intertwine the thing that you love doing as a outside of work thing to being a work thing. Sometimes that's a dream thing for a lot of people that I've known in working for big companies like Rockstar. It's like the last thing I want to look at is Grand Theft Auto, and it's just I can't
Yeah.
go anywhere near or Red Dead Redemption as an example. To which point it would just be like, yeah, not as much fun after a while. So yeah, always wanted to get into the industry. I think when I got into it, it was a different picture than what it is now, especially in the United Kingdom, which I'm based in Scotland, up in Edinburgh, and I think it was 2005. I went into software development at Napier as a university, and it's one of those things where if you were looking for a job at that time, it was always you had to have a computer science degree of some description. It's not like you could just walk on to a job anywhere. So that was kind of my history on it, of how I got into tech. I think one of the major pieces I would mention in my experience was as part of my honors degree in the third year at university, you would effectively do a year's worth of work experience at a company. So like these companies would work with the university. They'd say, right, here's all the folks for this year. You do an interview process with a bunch of different companies, and basically, if they like you, you're taken on, and that's part of your degree for that year, and you get credits towards that. And I think that was quite an uplift for me, which I thought was really good because at that point, you're building up connections of people in the tech scene in your local area. And I think at that point, if you're good or passable at that point, then it's kind of okay, you're still doing your degree, but at the end of that, we'll take you on, or whilst you're doing your degree, you could do part time, which was kind of my experience of the tech industry back then. So I was super lucky to the point where um, it was straight into a job as soon as I left university, and that for me that was kind of the aim. I wasn't really interested in the sort of academia of computer science. It was more like, I want to get in the industry. I'm not interested in kind of heavy duty theory. I enjoy solving problems. I want to get into the detail, into the dirtiness, and just like working on something really cool. Whilst I know there's other universities out there that are very much more into the theory, very much into the not really into the practice of it. So I think back then that helped me quite a lot um, for my career, big time.
I think, yeah, I wanted to also mention, just like as a comparison, that the university that I did back here in Romania, we had a similar approach, but it was over the summer. So we had like a 2 or 3 month kind of internship. After the interview process, after everything. So yeah, you had to be passable, but yeah, it was 3 months only. So I think the idea of having 1 year of actual practice, I think it's a lot better.
Yeah, and you got paid full time for it as well. So
Yeah,
it was a win-win situation, that scenario.
I think that's
Yeah,
really good.
it was awesome. Really
And
would recommend that.
do universities still do that these days in the UK?
Good question. I don't know. I think it was, so the particular university I went to was Edinburgh Napier. I don't know if the other Edinburgh universities were offering that sort of thing at the time. I'd be surprised if they still weren't doing that sort of thing, because that's ultimately a major selling point for a lot of people who are really interested in getting into the industry. Um, Another aspect which I find quite fascinating, as I mentioned, that was what it was like back when I was looking to get into the industry. I think nowadays it's changed quite significantly. So there's a couple of companies out there who specialize in career shifting folks who really just want to get into the industry, have done something else in their life, figured that's not for them. I want to get into the tech scene. Um, and these companies, obviously, you offer them your own hard earned money to go to these things. It's normally like a boot camp of solid 16, 20 weeks, whatever it is, of understanding software development. And it's, I think it's like a proper, just both feet straight in, whip through as much as you can in that period of time. And, you come out the other end of it hoping to land a role somewhere. Um, and I think that's quite a shift from what it used to be, where I think my assumption is a lot of companies were getting candidates for roles which had no real sort of experience in the industry, or were just trying their luck as an assumption. So I think there's kind of that, you have to have a bare minimum of this to show that you actually want to do this thing. But again, I think with these sort of boot camps, from what I can tell, and I know people who've done them and have come through the other end of them with roles and jobs, they're a really good starter for 10. I think if and we've actually hired a few people like that in the past as well, where you've put your hard-earned money into this shift. So for a start for 10, for me, it's like, that person's quite serious in order to do this. And then you also look, well, do they have pet projects that they have on GitHub or anything like that they have as almost like a portfolio to show that this is their passion. I think that's kind of the key one there, is that drive and passion that you would tend to look for these days, as opposed to, well, do they have this degree in this particular computer science industry? It's more of a, okay, show me, like, do you really care about technology? Is it something that you do outside of your work hours, as an example? And I'm not saying everyone has to do that, but it's kind of like a telltale thing to say, well, this person's done pet projects. They've learned stuff super quickly. They've managed to get up to speed with it really well. They've tried all different things. And those are all telltale signs to me, which is kind of a, well, this person really wants to get into software development. And also the main crux of it is, how much time and effort does the team that they join require, a lot, how much handholding does that person need when they join that team? And there's obviously going to be a time period of kind of productivity, as it were, or lack of, not as productive on their own. There's going to be that pairing up for some time. How long can I gauge that? How long do I think that's going to take? And that all kind of contributes. These all little telltale factors contribute towards that understanding of, are they going to be productive in 3 months, 6 months, a year? Where does that come in at? And that, from that perspective, it's is this the right candidate? Depending on, is this person really wanting to do this sort of thing? So, yeah, as I mentioned, things have changed. It makes it a bit more interesting and a bit more difficult to find the right people. But you do get some amazing folk coming in from that sort of background.
Yeah, I was about to ask, until they get through the door, so they can prove that they're really passionate about it. Let's say for a junior software engineer, or even for someone who wants to get into the tech industry, should they go for a certification, for example? Is that something that may catch your eye if you look at a CV, or how do you kind of assess a CV at that level? So we can discuss at junior level, and even after a couple of years of software development, what should they go for if they want to advance, or if they want to catch your eye with their CV?
Depends on the type of certification, really. I mean, even when I was still relatively new to the industry, I was looking at like Java Sun certification stuff. And at the end of the day, I was going to go in for it, but ultimately, what it made you do was basically be a compiler. So you had to look, the questions that they gave you were kind of a, look at this bit of code, like, where's the syntax errors or a runtime error that you think is going to occur? And you think to yourself, if this is the certification process, I don't really see the value in being a compiler, a human compiler, when as part of your day-to-day job, you have a compiler that you work with as part of compiling your Java. It's not like you're writing it in Notepad to then like say, okay, this is going to fly. I'm going to bundle up my jar and then fly that off the shelf. It's so again, it depends on what that certification might be, and how that applies to the role. I think having something along the lines of, I've gone through an intensive software development course, and I've done some projects. I think for me goes a lot further than I managed to get a certificate in, I don't know, JavaScript, AWS. It's like, all right, cool. How do you use that in practice? Like, it's some of these things, the mileage varies, if you see what I mean. Ultimately, for me, there's not much, especially for a junior or someone who's not been around in the software industry for a long period of time. There's not that much to go off of on a CV. I think a lot of it is kind of like, okay, here's my experience, here's my bootcamp thing that I'd done, and here's the projects that I've done as well. Put them up onto GitHub, and for me, that's kind of like, right, cool. I want to see your GitHub repository, because that tells me a whole lot more than any CV would ever tell me. When people come to interview for any roles that we have on offer, as an example, and I'm bringing people into the team, CVs I'll kind of check to see, well, is there major gaps in their career, or did they shift around a lot? Were they floating around different places within the space of 6 months on and off? Apart from that, it's more of a, right, come talk to us. come sit down as part of the interview process. Let's do some pair programming together. And then that tells me a whole lot more than anything on a bit of paper would. And that kind of knocks off do they care about testing, like unit tests? Do they structure their code well enough? Do they think about variable names and how they read? All those sorts of things. And I think that's the sort of thing that you get from a GitHub repository as well. You see how well they laid out their code. Have they thought about certain aspects? Have they done integration tests? Have they done unit tests? Do they have a nice README about how you run the app, as an example? And all these sorts of things tell me what they care about when they're doing their development, and if they know what they're doing. And then during the interview process, the one thing I love is if someone's done a project, you say, okay, talk me through what you've done. What did you like? What did you not like? What have you had to make a hard decision on? And from my own experience, it's like that's the most comfortable interview process that I would like to go through, because it's like I know my code base. I can talk through that. Okay, hopefully this time.
Yeah.
Sorry, folks.
You're good.
Where was I?
Where do the main, I guess, the most people you hire come from?
So I think a lot of folks in the UK have a bit more of those kind of bootcamp style backgrounds than what I've seen from other places. But I think with the way it is these days, it's kind of how much do you use that previous experience to be part of that interview process, know the type of person that you're looking for, and how that helps with the team composition as well plays into very much the type of person that you're looking to bring in. Can that team bring in a junior style person, or is there just not any room for that at the moment, and it's just seniors, and you have to get them in, get the ball rolling, to which point you've got on a CV of a senior, whatever a senior means, someone who's been in for a long period of time in the industry. So I think especially for hiring someone who's more junior, it's code camps. Someone might have been in the industry for a year. Again, at that point, there's very little that you can go off of, and I would still go back down to, if someone's really wanting to highlight themselves to me on their CV, it's here's my projects that I've worked on. Go have a look at them. And I think that would put them a cut above anyone else who's like said, right, I've done this code camp thing for 16 weeks, but I've not done anything off the back of it. I'm just now applying for stuff without any of the pet project stuff, as an example.
It makes sense. All right, so one thing which I also want us to cover, because this is actually something which I found out only years after starting in IT. So for example, I never encountered a principal software engineer, even when I was a software developer. So it depends from company to company. So if you want to perhaps walk us through how the ranking, for lack of better words, system works. First of all, what do you need to know to become a principal engineer? Because I know you have a lot of experience. Do you need that experience, or can you just specialize in, let's say, Java or Python or whatever, and then become a principal? And then walk us through the ranking.
It's a difficult one, because I think ranking's an interesting definition, an interesting word.
Lack of better word. I would say career progress then.
Okay.
That's a lot better.
So I think to start with, it's probably easier just to kind of go from so you're junior. Everyone knows junior. You're just getting into the scene. You're just learning a language. Doesn't matter which. You're just learning a language, and you're hoping that whichever company you're going to, are using that language or the two languages that you know to get the job done, so that again you're getting up to speed super quickly. So you're just focusing on those two things, or the languages that you know, understand them better as much as possible, get experience, and then just keep using them in anger, because it's very different between theory and practice, as everyone knows. And you're just working with that with your team as much as possible. You've been around the block a couple of times, you just get into that kind of, right, I know what I'm doing, I'm a bit more comfortable in my area. So then the next thing you start doing is all different frameworks or different languages for different problems. And then you're kind of, you start, instead of going down that sort of, this is the one thing I know, it's, I've started to learn these things. And then as time goes on and your experience goes on, it broadens like horizontally and vertically as well, to say, I've learned these different types of tech with these different types of frameworks, and then I've used them all extensively over time. So like SQL for your database side of things, or NoSQL, along with JavaScript for your front end with HTML, and then Java or Golang or whatever you're using for your back end, and AWS, whatever you're using for hosting. These are all things that you're starting to get that understanding of. And then you're getting to the point of and everyone's got a different definition for a lot of these things, especially when it comes to the senior stuff. I think from that point of view, from in my take on it, it's how do I become a multiplier? So I'm a singleton right now. Throughout my whole career, I understand code now. I'm comfortable with the languages that I'm using. How do I start teaching others in my team? Or have I found an issue that maybe I could solve with a library that not just my team could use, but other teams in the company? And at that point, you're multiplying your efforts across multiple different areas, and that multiplication kind of keeps going up as you go in terms of your experience and knowledge. And then you probably look into that sort of tech lead role once you've gone into that senior for a while. And at that point, it's a different ballgame. Things are slightly different because it's not just tech anymore. It's people and tech. Regardless of you being just a tech lead or a leader or a principal who's got line management responsibilities as well, you are effectively leading that team from a technology standpoint as well, which requires another set of skills that you wouldn't get just from tech. So it's there's empathy involved. There's understanding of, how people work, and how do you maintain morale and confidence in people that you're going down the right route, and resolving conflicts within the team as well. So it's not just technical prowess anymore. And then from that point, where I am is multiple teams, again, multiplied across. So it's not just looking after one group of people, it's multiple groups of people. And it's an interesting one because your tech kind of comes up a notch in the sense of more of a higher level, more almost like an architectural overview, making sure standards are met across each of the different teams, making sure everyone's moving towards and are aligned technologically in the company, and especially in your teams, so that someone's not creating something with Kubernetes, another one's making something with serverless, and another one's decided, no, I'm just going to have a machine under my desk. It's how do you make sure everyone's got that alignment on top? So I think that's, again, the sphere of influence kind of enlarges as you kind of go through that those different roles, and they're all quite different from each other, especially once you get from tech lead to principal. And then after that, it's like, do you have staff as well alongside a tech lead? And then you've got CTO, which again is another ballgame, because that's ultimately business and tech, which is another story altogether.
So basically, you keep adding and you keep adding.
Keep adding, yeah, pretty much. And it's not just tech that you keep adding. Not everyone who's amazing at tech makes for good leaders, especially tech leads. As a tech lead, you and a principal as well, you're not infallible. You're not going to know everything, but you have the teams around you and you build the teams around you to cover off each other and the lack of knowledge that you have and that the teams have, so that as a composition, you've got a well-rounded group. So there's like maybe one person who's really, really good with front-end frameworks. And you're like, okay, cool. I need to go set up a whole CMS site. I'm going to ask them, because instead of me taking my time to learn about it, let's leverage the skills that they've got. And it's okay to say, I don't know. That's not like the skills that I have. Let's go speak to this person, see what they say. So that requires, again, not just tech understanding, but people, and that's where things can get quite tricky. Just because you're good at tech doesn't mean you can run a good team overall that's happy and can get the job done. It's a cut above or slightly different, I guess.
And do you work in agile environments, or is it more?
Yeah. Funnily enough, when I kind of kicked off in my career, it was kind of one of those times where everyone said they were doing agile, but no one really understood what agile meant, much like it is today.
Yeah.
To be fair. I was kind of at the tail end of Prince 2 world, where I think I once got given a requirements document, which was about 50 pages in length, and it just showed you screenshot by screenshot what they wanted on each page. And then, to be fair, it was like, I don't even know what half this stuff means. It was for a very particular industry that I'd never experienced before. So then it's like, okay, do I need to do anything with this? Is it just recording this information as it is? Because this field name is called DD. It's like, I don't know what that means. Do you need me to do anything, any calculation on it? Or how long is this meant to be? Which is kind of literally just thrown over the wall to do. And yeah, but that's the only time I ever experienced really kind of a waterfall approach. A lot of the other times, a lot of people were really looking towards kind of those agile methodologies. Or to be fair, when I first started again in my career after that waterfall side of things, it was a small company that I started with, and it was just like, just get stuff done. there was no structure. It was just there's these bugs, go deal with these bugs. Oh, we want this functionality, and we want it to do this, go do it. And then you're just like, okay, here I go, like just clacking away. That was kind of a bit interesting. And then once someone actually said, no, let's put tasks on a board, and we move them across the board, and then you go through your different statuses of, here's your to do, here's your doing, here's your done. And then it's like, oh, okay, so there's a better way of doing this, right? Got you.
It almost feels like you're describing how someone discovered Kanban board.
Yeah, because that's kind of you the way that you've described a lot of elements of principal engineer, and you're not the first. Kind of Marius was our guest last week as well. The leadership and the way that you have to know your teams and the cross functionality of the roles, as well as the Kanban. It does seem that there's a lot of elements of Scrum and Kanban and the Scrum Master and the principal engineer. Probably not fully, but there's a lot of mixed elements there.
I think it's interesting when you go through your career, because as you start out, you're just like, I just care about code. I just want to do my code, and then that's it. But then as you kind of get a bit older, a bit uglier, a bit more into the industry, you're like, I want to do something that actually makes a difference. And if someone just throws something to me, I'm like, why am I developing this? What's the value? I don't understand if this is going to help you out at the end of the day, and help me understand your problem. And then I can help you come up with a solution at the back of it, which might take half the amount of time as what you've given me just now, as an example. And, you know, I've had my fair share of projects where it's just go off and do this, and then you do it for 6 months. It's never out the door. And then all of a sudden it gets canned. And you're like, I've just spent 6 months of my life contributing towards this project, and it's not gone anywhere. At that point, you're like, there's got to be a better way of doing this sort of stuff. And it's when you start having those conversations with Scrum Masters, etc., especially as an engineer, that's kind of where things start becoming more intertwined. Where you're like, okay, yeah, to get this out, I want to reduce as much waste as possible. just get to the actual core of what it is that we need out the door, so that I can see what I've done out into the world being used. Because at the end of the day, that's the greatest feeling ever, is someone's actually using something that you've created, and you're getting that feedback, and you're getting that user base. And there's nothing worse than, or more demoralizing than, spending all that time for nothing. So I think it's quite a natural, as you mentioned, evolution into a very similar thought process of reduction of inventory, reduction of waste, just validate assumption, get something out the door, try it, see what happens. Because users do funny things, and no one can predict what a user can do, So how do you combat that? Agile.
I almost wanna draw a comparison here, and I wanna ask you, how do you view retrospectives?
I think,
and if you do it with your team?
I think it's actually one of the most important things, the most important ceremony in the whole of software development, agile, lean, is that retrospective. I've not had the chance to be part of a retrospective recently, because it's one of those things where it's very much a team and a safe space for each of those teams to do stuff. If I get pulled into a retrospective, I've done something wrong, if you know what I mean, with that team, and they got a bone to pick with me. But I think even postmortems or something after, they're always good. But yeah, it's the core key thing of that self-reflection, improvement, and iterative process to get better at something. If you've got that, then it doesn't matter what you're aiming for. If as long as you're keeping regimented with that retrospective, and you're actioning off of the back of the feedback that people are giving you, then you're going to get better regardless of what you're doing. Yeah, you can put sprint reviews to the side. You put your stand-ups to the side if you really have to, but never kill a retro, because it's fundamental.
Thanks for sharing that. Where I wanted to draw the parallel is that we actually had Marius, principal software engineer, last episode, and the way they were doing retrospectives, they did not really focus on them that much, because they were doing it with like a larger group, and they were doing it monthly or even once every 2 months. So I guess it depends from company to company, and there's no one size fits all. But I do, me being a Scrum Master, I do understand why I appreciate retrospectives, and I would prefer it, like you mentioned, I would prefer we give out the other meetings or the other ceremonies and do retros first. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think I cast it aside in the sprint reviews. I think they're still super important. Ultimately, the core principle is a feedback loop. So you got the feedback loop from the team, from a retrospective of introspective, looking at, how can we improve ourselves? Are we doing the right thing? And then in the sprint review, it's a celebration of what you've completed, what you've done, and is there a chance to speak to a stakeholder, get their input, like have those conversations with those people to make sure you're on the right path. Because if you, as long as you do that every 2 weeks, you're not going to drift away onto something that doesn't really help, or is kind of lost focus, because you can always come back. You've only, worst case scenario, you've been out of touch for 2 weeks, but then you can come back again and then refine and change tact as an example. But again, that core principle of what's your feedback loop and making sure that you're doing that is fundamental.
All right, fair enough. All right, thank you. Perhaps that wasn't a really tech-oriented conversation, but yeah, I think it's also good to look at the process that's happening on the side, because one of the things which people end up discovering once they get their first jobs, and it was my case for sure, is that you're not just applying what you've learned blindly. Like, you need to apply that within a framework or within a structured way of working within a team. So then a lot of other skills come into play, because you're not on your own and someone's testing your work, and there's going to be dynamics. And you may be a great developer, but perhaps you're not really easy to get along with other people. So there's a lot of other stuff that come into play once you actually get into this job. And yeah, that's
It's
why we
very
also,
it's very
sorry.
much a people industry.
Yeah,
Um, it's teamwork, really. I don't think I don't. There's probably a handful of people who managed to do something on their own successfully. Again, no one's infallible. You'll have weaknesses and strengths, and it's understanding those. Even if you had a startup, you might be great at tech but terrible at business, or vice versa. It's you need someone to back you up, and that the same is true for software development in a normal company. You have to cover all those different bases and work together. um, you might have the best developers in the world in one room, but if they don't get along, nothing's getting out the door.
yeah.
It's
Fair enough. What was the most, I guess, surprising skill that you've learned, probably just not in university, that you've learned during your career?
um, skill. I think there's a few things I didn't realize I would lean on as much getting into this industry, but I definitely feel like not like as much of a skill, but rather just think something that characteristic is definitely empathy with people. Again, is very much a people thing. And in working with people, it's success or failure based on that, and sometimes it's understanding they've had a rough day. Let's chat and make sure they're okay. And that I think that is understated how important that sort of thing is, so that you're maintaining that happiness and flow in the team. And flow is important, especially. So if any disruption of flow, you're um, kind of wheel slipping a little bit, then it can really disrupt the team's productivity as well. Or having that hard conversation at the time when it needs to be had, or openly praising people when they've done something amazing in the team. I think it's important as well, and acknowledging that. So I think that's one thing that, as I mentioned, as you get further on into the career, that is like, okay, not everyone is like that. It's one of those things where it's like, okay, some people are very much just into their own zone. They don't really look out for other people, and um, at that point, it becomes a lot harder, especially the tech lead, to have that type of person in the team, because it causes rifts. If rifts happen, then people stop thinking about doing development and start thinking about other things, which doesn't help anyone. So empathy is quite a big one, I'd say.
Which is funny. It's a bit counter to the stereotype that you think of a developer, programmer, of somebody that's really introverted, just by themselves, doesn't want to talk to anybody, and yeah. But people skills are important almost
Oh, for
everywhere.
sure. I think, don't get me wrong, you can still have really amazing people at what they do from a tech perspective, but I think the ability to have them in different types of teams becomes a lot harder. So it's for them to contribute, there has to be a very specific scenario, which might not always be the case or the situation, depending on where you are. So when you have someone like that in the team, it's like, well, maybe I can get them to do this in this thing on its own and they'll nail it, but that isn't going to always be there, and it becomes quite awkward. A lot of firefighting after a while.
One thing I also want to perhaps cover is if you find it more difficult to work in a remote environment compared to a live one, especially in programming, where I know when I was a junior that you need a certain degree of hand-holding to some extent, and I guess that's a bit more difficult in an online setting fully remote? And how do you view it?
It can be. I think using extreme programming sort of techniques helps with that sort of stuff. So pairing, as an example, I mean, it can be full on. It can be tiring because you're constantly focused on this thing, even face to face next to each other. You're always sitting beside each other, focusing on this thing, and for that long period of time, it can take quite a lot out of you. But I think pairing is such an amazing technique to use. Like, regardless of how experienced you are in that sliding scale of from junior all the way up to CTO, I can always learn something from someone, whether they've been in the industry for 10 years or whether they've been in the industry for 2 months. There's there's so much you can learn from everyone, and the best way to learn is from solving a problem together, and pairing is one of those ways of doing it. And then people who are especially more junior can ask those questions of, well, why are you doing it that way? Or, oh, I didn't realize you could do that with that type of function. That's pretty cool. And then it's, again, becoming that multiplier as a engineer or senior or tech lead with junior folks. It's heavy duty and it's heavily involved, but I think it's a lot better than just having someone sitting on their own. You say, right, look at this tutorial, off you go, let me know if you got any issues, because at that point it's like, well, there's no one to turn around to at the desk and say, you got a minute. It's like, it's the one thing I noticed, especially with the remote, it's everything is more of a ceremony. It's more of a, hi, can I call you? Is that okay? Or you have to set up a meeting for a very particular purpose. It's not like I'm going to like put my head over the desk and say, hey, Dave, what do you think about this thing? Like, have a quick chat. So sometimes it feels like there's a barrier there of entry before you actually have that conversation with someone. It's like, well, I don't know if that person's in the middle of like drinking their tea, they're in the middle of a production issue, or, they're just doing some code. It's like, you're second guessing, should I actually speak to that person? Should I reach out to them? Am I just going to be in the way? So I think just being very open and having that level of trust and ways of working with people to say, and I've seen that done in one of the teams that we worked with, which is like, based on your status, like, how do you want to be interacted with? Let's have that common ground of understanding so that it's okay to ask people and say, hey, can I call you? Can we have a conversation about something? Or, oh no, they're on do not disturb or busy. I'll just leave them alone just now, just async, and then come back. Those are sorts of techniques you start to kind of have to embed to become more productive, because it's a different story compared to the old school being in the office together.
Which, even there, I think there were points where people did not really want to be disturbed. But yeah, they would just say it to your face.
Just straight away, do not disturb. Get
Yeah,
no things whatsoever.
Yeah. Just quickly following up on that, you said pairing with programmers. How do you implement that? Do you, for instance, have two developers on a live call while they're coding so they can have that, or just the ability to call each other whenever they need to?
I think you need, again, it's having that level of trust with each other and a level of understanding to say, right, okay, let's spend the next 45 minutes, hour, sitting down together, coding out this problem on a call, whether it's Slack, Zoom, Teams. You've got the tools now in Visual Studio, which is amazing. Code Together, I think it's called, where you're literally just on a coding session on someone's machine. The other person also has access to type at the same time on that same file. It's pretty cool. So there's a lot less friction in doing that, and I think using that call to call whilst doing that sort of thing on Visual Studio makes it a lot easier. And again, just say, right, at the end of this hour, let's take a break, and then we'll come back again, and just keep that give each other a bit of breathing space, a bit of breathing room, to go off and do something for a minute and then come back again. And even just having, again, if you got the level of trust with that individual, you can just leave the call open as an example, whatever works for the two folks, and just say, right, after 5 minutes I'll be back on my desk. And then as long as you've got that common understanding and way of working with each other, it works quite well in my experience.
No, fair enough.
I was wondering if this is, because I was actually about to ask, based on your experience, is this like an easy thing to implement, or because perhaps there are some companies where everyone, well, or the leadership expects you to do your job, fix this, don't work together, because basically that's two people working on one problem rather than each person working on yeah. So I think you know where I'm getting at, but is this like a culture thing from your experience? Is it easy to kind of implement, or is it something that it takes a while to get to?
I think there has to be a couple of things in place, and a lot of them just are based around trust. So you have to have trust in your team with your team members, start for 10, so that you can be open and honest with each other when you're pairing and say, yeah, I don't know how to solve this. What do you think? Let's go find out on Google together. Having that vulnerability is essential. And again, that is played out between the team and principals, management, or whoever else outside of it who are working with them, to trust the team and trust that they've gone through a hiring process. They know what they're doing. They're in the team. They're with us. Let them work in the way that works for them. And I think that's not always going to be the case in every single company that you work for. So I guess that's also something to call out, is especially as a junior or less experienced individual in software, interviewing the company and seeing how they treat people in that respect and giving them the autonomy is essential, because ultimately, especially as a junior, unless you've got the right environment in place for them, for some people it can make or break them as from a career perspective, because they might just get the totally wrong idea about software development and they think, I've had a really crap experience with this company. They're very top down, very micromanagey, want us to just deliver without really helping me out in my career. It's just get to the grindstone, which can put a lot of people off, especially if they're new to the industry and they've not experienced it anywhere else. Ultimately, I would say hiring a junior for that team is the wrong thing to do in that regard. Again, the conditions need to be correct for them to be in to succeed. And again, as you mentioned, not every company is like that. Not every team member is like that. So it's, how do you compose that team in the way that you want to work, and the way that the way that you value working as a team is quite important. And then it's up to someone like myself at that principal level to really work with that team and embody that trust, and also, buff away certain external people and protect the team as much as possible to let them continue on to become as efficient as they can be. And the proof would be in delivery as well, because ultimately with pairing, it's you're getting not just that contact of that person understanding more with this person, you're understanding the code base better together. You got a deeper understanding of that code base. Peer reviews or code reviews are just a poor version of pairing, because ultimately it's an asynchronous conversation that you're having as part of that code review. Pairing for me is, it's a substitute for pairing. And at that point, everyone knows everything about each part of the code base. You'll have a better solution there. You'll be honest with each other, and most likely make sure things are structured better, or even better unit test coverage, etc. All these things contribute towards getting something out the door with quality and getting it done right first time round, instead of going down a rabbit hole on your own with a half-baked solution, getting out the door and you got 6 bugs to contend with the next again day, and before you know it, you're not working on the new thing anymore. You're working on the old thing that you've created that's had a bunch of problems. So whilst you might have got out the door quickly, you're actually still working on it for a longer period of time. Pairing for me helps with that. So again, coming back to showing the efficiencies that are there from doing something like pair programming, especially outwards to external parties. I think if you can show that it's a methodology that works well, or if the team's working well, then no one's going to question the methodologies that you're using. At least not in the companies that I've worked at, or maybe some people are just nosy. But ultimately, it's as long as you're getting stuff out, then I don't really see anyone really kind of knocking on your door. It's when things go wrong that people take a more vested interest. So
yeah, makes sense. Thanks. So I think I've only got one question, which is two-sided, if you may. So do you have, for anyone who's a junior or just started into IT, do you have like any tips and tricks when applying to a company, or any red flags to look out for? Like I would say to someone starting in Scrum, if they're looking for certificates for, I don't know, project manager and PSM and SAFe and everything else all at once, they may not know what they're looking for. So if you have any sort of red flags versus tips and tricks.
Yeah, I think to similar vein that you mentioned there, if something's mentioning every technology under the sun, then it's like they clearly don't have a strategy or understand what they're looking for, and at that point it can get quite hairy quite quickly. I think the other one I'd mention on your CV as an example, if you're trying to get into the industry, as I mentioned before, pet project stuff, GitHub repositories, just show what you can do. That puts you well above like 80% of any other candidates in that sort of situation, in my experience, in my opinion. And I think other red flags. I think now you got me thinking in terms of
it can be even during interviews, for example.
Yeah, just try to figure out, like, even during the interview process, even just asking like who's going to be in the team, especially as a junior engineer, like how do you see me working in the team? Is it going to be, if the answer is like, we'll just give you a task and you just run off and do it, or is it going to be the person that's interviewing you, are they in the team? They'll say, well, I'll work alongside you, we'll be working on this together. As your line manager or whoever it might be, as an example, looking after you, the chance for the candidate to interview that person if they're on the call. If they're not on a call, that's for me is a bit of a red flag, because at that point it's like you got a couple of things of don't know what team they're going into, or not sure what they've got planned for them overall, and you're not getting a chance to speak to someone who's actually in the team. So if you're not getting to speak to anyone that's not in the team, you don't know if you can work with them, which is kind of the baseline. So I know that as a key driver in the interviews that we do, it's like, well, if you haven't had the chance to speak to someone in first stage, second stage, then let's go out our way to have a conversation with at least one person in that team before anyone says yay or nay. Because at that point, you can ask those questions on the day-to-day. What's it like working in this team on the day-to-day situation? Who's going to be there? Who can help me with day-to-day stuff? Because if you're just left out on a limb, that's not a good experience for anyone. So that's the sort of thing I would definitely be wary of when interviewing for places. And if they give you interview questions like, I don't know, what's inversion of control, or like what's a null pointer exception, or something like that you could easily get off of Google. You're like, why are you asking me this question? I don't understand what value this provides you. Do you see what I mean? It's like This doesn't tell you about my experience or my skill sets that I bring. It just tells you, can I Google something in 2 minutes? Which, to be fair, is a skill set in its own right. Is knowing how to Google. That's half of software development as well. But if it's just a spot test like that, I just think, do you really know what you're doing? Do you really know the type of person that you're looking for? Do you really know how to interview? And yeah, I would be very wary about that sort of interview process.
Thank
Ask
you.
more
Good
questions.
tips.
It might not be the worst thing in the world, the worst position in the world, but I would definitely ask more questions off the back of that and dig in a bit deeper. Yeah. Also, I guess the more experience you get, the more you want to know about the company, how the company's doing, what's their business model, how do they make money? As an example, how do they stay afloat? Does it sound shaky? Does it sound like a Dogecoin or something that's a little bit like, is this stable or is this going to flop next week and I'm going to have to look for another job? A lot of time I do appreciate, especially when you're junior, you take what you can get and the experience that you get when you can, which is always a harder thing to do, but it's definitely worth knowing about how that company works. How does it function? How have they been doing lately? Like doing some background checks yourself. You know, have they struggled with funding? Have they just got funding? If they've just got funding, then by all means get stuck in. You'll be all right for at least a year. But those sorts of things that are really quite, you don't really think about, especially when you're first starting out, but are actually relatively quite important once you're in the door.
Nice.
Fair enough. And kind of last question on my end, if it's okay. What do you think of language processors like ChatGPT and all these types of AI tools? How they interact with everything, including programming?
I think they're interesting. ChatGPT is quite a cool one. I think I've seen some blog posts about people using it, and it needed a bit of coercion, and it managed to get somewhere. I still think that regardless of the questions that you ask, you still need to know something about the thing that you're asking, and to know, is this a good answer? Because something like ChatGPT doesn't tell you if it doesn't really know. It just gives you an answer and says, yes, this is the answer, even when it's wrong. So that might get refined over time, and I'm sure it will, but ultimately it's at this point in time, it's a very, very clever search engine. And I think it's the same principle applies there, where you can go to Stack Overflow and find a solution that might work. But is it the best solution? Is it actually going to fly in the situation that you need to use it for? Is it scalable? Does it handle particular scenarios that particular answer wouldn't cover? And sometimes you find in Stack Overflow, when you actually look at the comment below, it wasn't actually the best answer. There's someone else has answered it better, but they've not logged it as such. Anyway, same sort of principle there, I think. Maybe in 5 years, it'll be a different story. But right now, you still need to know about it to know if it's a good answer or not.
No, yeah, fair enough. So it's fair to say, yeah, it's not exactly going to replace anybody's job, especially in development anytime soon. But is it a useful tool for a developer to use? The way Marius, our last guest, put it, it might be a very good co-pilot for a developer to use in certain situations.
Yeah, funny you mentioned the word co-pilot. I think there's definitely things like GitHub Copilot and things of that nature, which definitely speed up the process. I think those are the sort of things that can enhance and really help with the development time. But again, if a junior was to use it, they're not really understanding the code and why it was written in that particular way, if you know what I mean. If it's using a particular, like async await function as an example, whatever it is, it's like, okay, it's doing this and I'm getting this response back. I don't really fully appreciate what's going on under the hood. I'm just taking it at face value. So it's nice to play with and really help with a lot of boilerplate. But yeah, it's still something that you still need to know what you're doing and why you're doing it, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, fair enough.
Again, could be wrong, but that's my opinion.
No, absolutely.
Well, thank you very much. And I think that's pretty much a wrap for our episode. Thank you, Stefan, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And for any comments or anything that's maybe unclear, drop a comment below, basically.